Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this event. And I would like to thank, before starting, the Hague Peace Project and Iran Academia for organizing this event and for giving us the opportunity to have this discussion about the important issue of education and academic freedom in Iran. Like my friends' earlier presentations, my presentation also engages with the theme of state-sanctioned censorship in higher education in Iran. I focus in particular on extreme censorship of information materials related to sexual orientation and gender identity in higher education programs such as psychology and psychiatry in Iran. And I discuss how this censorship situation has concretely resulted in harmful and abusive practices toward lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in healthcare settings in Iran. The information I provide is based on the research that I have previously done with a network called the Iranian Lesbian and Transgender Network, also known in Persian as Shishrang. This organization conducts research, advocacy, and campaigning work on the human rights situation of LGBT people in Iran. And it has over 100 members, many of them in the country, and it is also an official member of the International Lesbian and Gay Association, ILGA. Before going into the details of my talk, let me begin by telling you the story of a recent controversy in Iran that can give you a flavor of the repressive and highly homophobic context in which our education system in Iran operates. In May 2017, in the days leading up to Iran's presidential election, a global education agenda known as Education 230 suddenly became the subject of a very intense political controversy in the country. This controversy was accompanied by a resurgence of homophobic remarks by public officials against gay and lesbian people. Education 230 is a document that provides guidance for the implementation of one of the Sustainable Development Goals on education, and this goal commits states to ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education for all. The guidance was adopted by 184 member states during a high-level UNESCO meeting in Paris in 2015, and it sets a series of targets that emphasize, among other things, gender equality, human rights, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, and appreciation of diversity. President Rouhani had made a decision in 2016 to adopt Education 230 and integrate some of its guidelines into the country's education system. At the time, the decision had not received a lot of controversy. However, just weeks before the election day, Iran's supreme leader denounced the government for quietly adopting Education 230 and said, "It is the Islamic Republic here. Here, Islam is the benchmark. It is not a place where the deficient, destructive, and corrupt Western lifestyle can infiltrate. Agendas like UNESCO 230 are not agendas that the Islamic Republic of Iran should ever surrender and submit to." This harsh reproach by the supreme leader was quickly followed by a chorus of conservative voices, which similarly attacked the government for adopting this UN document that they claimed corrupted society and promoted homosexuality. One assembly of expert members said this document, this document provides that those from vulnerable groups shall be protected, but by vulnerable groups, it actually means homosexuals. He further warned, this document shall ensure that in 13 years from now, our children and youth will be driven away from Quran and spirituality and become wholly occupied, and I'm sorry here for the offensive language, with hamjansbazi or faggotry and sexual teachings. Another assembly of experts member said this document provides that the education systems of states parties must be inclusive, and he found an issue with the term inclusive because he said being inclusive of minorities is problematic because the term minorities encompasses not only religious, political, and intellectual minorities, but also sexual minorities. This was his direct quote. The Iranian authorities have a long track record of inciting hatred against people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. They typically vilify homosexual people as immoral, corrupt, subhuman, and animalistic. However, the campaign of hate and demonization does not stop here. Iranian officials also describe homosexuality as a disease or disorder in need of cure, and this is where health education professionals and the higher education system becomes highly relevant. In March 2013, the head of Iran's High Council for Human Rights, Mohammad Javad Larijani, said in a media interview, homosexuality is an illness, a very bad illness. Homosexuals are sick people who should receive treatment. They have to be put under psychiatric care and sometimes even biological and physical care. We need to adopt a clinical and medical approach toward this issue. In the rest of my talk, I will discuss how this clinical and medical approach has indeed been adopted and how state-affiliated health education professionals in fields such as psychology and psychiatry have been at the forefront of doing so. First of all, affirmative information materials on issues related to gender diversity and diversity in sexual orientations have been wholly excluded from higher education curriculums and professional textbooks in Iran. For example, students studying medicine, psychology, psychiatry, and public health are kept unaware of basic facts such as that homosexuality was removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 1973 with the recognition that homosexuality per se implies no impairment in judgment, stability, reliability, and general social or vocational capabilities. Or they are kept unaware that the World Professional Association for Transgender Health has affirmed that gender variance is not in and of itself pathological, and that having a cross-gender or transgender identity does not constitute a psychiatric disorder. Neither health professionals nor are health professionals trained in international standards of care for the health of transgender and gender non-conforming people. These standards stress that not all transgender people necessarily need or want hormones and surgery to change their sexual characteristics. Such censorship of information is not, however, the only problem. In recent years, many pseudo-medical research projects and textbooks have also proliferated in the country, which advocate harmful interventions for curing homosexuality. Based on these projects and textbooks, individuals shall be diagnosed with mental disorder simply based on their same-sex desires and non-conformity to gender stereotypes. The researchers and authors of these texts give a false or deceptive impression about the clinical and scientific basis of psychiatric efforts intended to change people's sexual orientation or gender identity, and they misrepresent the effectiveness and the great potential for harm of such treatments. Furiously, the authors and gender experts, I should say, leading on these projects, pride themselves on their enlightened and scientific approach toward gender troubles and their so-called benevolent approach to gender-troubled individuals. And these are their own terminologies. They see themselves as the champions of developing medical interventions for the prevention and rehabilitation of disorders in gender-troubled children, adolescents, and adults. These pseudo-medical interventions proposed by such researchers and authors have included hormone therapy, electroshock therapies, and prescription of psychoactive and antipsychotic and nausea-inducing medications. In many instances, these books have recommended, and these gender experts have recommended, that these invasive treatments are combined with a range of aversion behavior therapies. These behavior therapies include instructions to wear makeup, practice the stereotypical behaviors and mannerisms of the gender assigned at birth, and direct instructions to lesbian and gay people referring to doctors to engage in sexual intercourse with members of the opposite sex in order to move away from homosexual desires. The Iranian Lesbian and Transgender Network has documented the cases of lesbian, gay, and transgender individuals in Iran who were subjected to these invasive and violent treatments in order to modify their sexual desires and gender expressions. These individuals have narrated in their accounts how they suffered mental impairment, physical pain, depression, loss of interest and pleasure, guilt and low self-esteem, disturbed sleep and appetite, low energy and poor concentration due to these treatments. Many of them told the Lesbian and Transgender Network that their doctors and therapists failed to disclose the risk and harms associated with such conversion and aversion therapies, and the doctors and counselors did not offer treatments that are aimed at self-awareness and self-acceptance. I will just tell you a number of quotes from these young people who have suffered these treatments. One is Mehdad, a 17-year-old person who identifies as a female to male transsexual. He was given psychoactive medications when he was 15 years old in order to eliminate his homosexual tendencies. He told us that he slipped into depression within a month of using them. Another person we interviewed was Kia, a female to male transgender. This is how he identifies. He was similarly prescribed large doses of psychoactive medication because of his same-sex desires and gender variant expressions. He told us, I was a happy 17-year-old girl, 17-year-old. I was into sports and did not suffer from any severe depression. I just had this condition that they called gender identity disorder. Oh, previous one. Yeah. The pills that I was given are normally prescribed to people with severe mental conditions who require hospitalization. I was given such pills just because I had expressed a sense of dissatisfaction with my assigned gender. The pills turned out to be a heavy substance for my teenage body that had never consumed any narcotics or alcohol. They numbed my entire body to the point that I became incontinent. Paulina, who identifies as a lesbian woman and is a 20-year-old and is 20 years old now, told us that she was given medication and electroshocks at the age of 14. After her parents took her to a psychiatrist to address her anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts, which they believed was caused by her sexual orientation. However, Paulina herself told us that her distress was linked to isolation, stigma, shame, and her poor relationship with her mother, who was constantly teasing and controlling her and preventing her from having friendships with girls. She said that her doctor did not discuss the impact of this hostile family and social context on her mental health and only prescribed her drugs to change her sexual orientation. She said, my doctor did not usually talk in our sessions. He would only listen and take notes and then hand me a prescription. During that period, I cried day and night. I did not study and could not do much. I had grown so tired of the tensions and conflicts at home that I accepted to take all the drugs that he prescribed. The drugs caused weight gain and my body swelled. I slept all night and most of the day and did not understand life anymore. I started to feel that there is no point to life. I was disgusted with myself. Paulina said that when she shared her self-hatred with her doctor and that she told her doctor that she still had feelings for girls, her doctor recommended that she receives 12 sessions of electroshock therapy. The doctor told me that he has prescribed me ECT. This was his exact phrase. I did not know what ECT meant. He said that in his opinion, I should be hospitalized for 20 days and remain under his care because I was at risk of committing suicide. His theory was that if I had not lived the past I had, and if my father had not treated me the way he had, I would have grown up a straight girl. He said he wanted to help me solve this problem and put the past behind me. He believed that with the ECT, I could forget the past, my sexual orientation would get corrected, and I could begin to lead a normal life. Paulina subsequently received 6 courses of electroshock therapy, which she said resulted in extreme confusion and memory loss for about 6 months. In the years following the treatment, her research became slurred and her eyebrows keep shaking in tense situations. Farnaz, a young woman who identifies as a lesbian, was also prescribed electroshock therapy when she was 22 years old in Iran in order to address the distresses associated with her same-sex sexual attractions. She told us, my psychiatrist diagnosed me with severe depression related to gender identity disorder. She prescribed electroshock therapy instead of medication. I went to one shock therapy session and refused to go again because my cognitive faculties got entirely disturbed. My memory stopped functioning correctly. I would forget everything. I would try to study but would fail to make sense of what I was reading. I was told that the therapy is aimed at eliminating my depression and gender identity disorder. My identity was considered to be pathological. Another therapy that the doctors have frequently recommended is hormone therapy. Pegah, who identifies as a male to female transsexual, was put on testosterone when she was only 21 years old. The idea was to cure the return of, cause the return of masculine characteristics in her while at that time she was still a he. She said the endocrinologist I went to wrote me a prescription for testosterone. The idea was to boost my testosterone levels. I think it was after he gave me the first or second injection that I began to feel agitated, as if I was trembling on the inside. My body was aching and I began grinding my teeth. When I complained about the effects of the hormones on my body, my doctor said, your body did not accept the hormone because you were mentally resistant. It is important to recall at this point that credible international studies have consistently warned about the serious negative repercussions of aversion therapies on the mental and psychological health of the individuals undergoing them. For example, the American Psychoanalytic Association 1990 position statement on reparative therapy states that such directed efforts to modify people's sexual orientation are against fundamental principles of psychoanalytic treatment and often substantial psychological pain by reinforcing damaging internalized attitudes. In an earlier resolution on appropriate therapeutic responses to sexual orientation, the association reaffirmed its position to portrayals of lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth and adults as mentally ill due to their sexual orientation. And it defined appropriate interventions as those that counteract bias that is based on ignorance and unfounded beliefs about sexual orientation. In a similar position statement by the American Health Organization, which is the North and South American branch of the World Health Organization, it is also warned that this statement calls for caution against services that purport to cure people with non-heterosexual sexual orientations as they lack medical justification and represent a serious threat to the health and well-being of affected people. The organization noted the global scientific and professional consensus on the fact that homosexuality is a normal and natural variation of human sexuality and cannot be regarded as a pathological condition. It is deeply regrettable that health education professionals and practicing psychiatrists and psychologists are engaging in such abusive and harmful practices against LGBT people without any regard or knowledge of international standards. This distressing situation demonstrates once again how essential free access to information and education is, including for the protection of people's human rights, including their right to health. Under international human rights law, the right to health is interconnected with the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas. These rights require that states refrain from censoring, withholding, or intentionally misrepresenting health-related information, including sexual orientation and information. And this was a quote from the UN Committee on Social and Economic and Cultural Rights, which monitors the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The right to health and the right to information also impose on states an obligation to ensure that education materials do not reinforce demeaning stereotypes and do not perpetuate forms of prejudice which contribute to the social exclusion, discrimination, and denial of human dignity, often experienced by historically marginalized groups such as persons of non-heterosexual orientation. As sad as the situation is, I would like to end on a more promising note. I'm aware that a group of Iranian LGBT rights activists have recently prepared, with the help of several international experts, an alternative series of guidelines in Persian that familiarize psychologists and psychiatrists with affirmative and appropriate models of psychological support and counseling. This is a very hopeful development, and I hope that the next time I give a talk about this issue, I can share the accounts of LGBT individuals who have received positive affirmative counseling and support from health professionals who are knowledgeable and who are committed to equality and